Hey everyone, welcome to this video. This is actually part 2 of our 2-part series covering a full suspension setup, setting everything up so that you're dialed in and ready to ride. In the first part, if you haven't checked it out, go do that now. We cover everything to get started, everything to get your initial dialing set up. This is part 2 where we're going to try to bottom out everything, see how everything feels, see what we need to change and how to do that and why that's important. So sit back, relax, enjoy this video. Let's get going.
Bobby just rocked that really killer kicker right there, and we had him try to hook it as hard as he could and see if we could see what kind of travel we're getting throughout the range. And we didn't touch these O-rings. We reset them before the jump. This is where we're sitting now, so you can see we are not far from the max travel line, and I have a feeling that Bobby's going to want to hit some things a little more aggressive than that. We're kind of in a similar spot back here. You can see that O-ring is nearly to the end of the stanchion. So really leads me to believe that we need to add a spacer in each one of these. And after adding that spacer, we'll need to reset sag again. And then depending on where we end up pressure-wise, that will define whether or not we need to change our rebound setting. So this is all still part of, believe it or not, the initial sag, air pressure, spacer equation. This is all setting up the air spring. So we're still not quite there. This is really encouraging. This is a great start. But I think we ought to build in a little more progressivity for Bobby. And also with that, when you add a spacer, typically you can run a little less pressure, which means you're going to have a slightly softer off the top feel, and then it's going to ramp up. The further through the stroke you go, it's going to ramp up harder. So I think it'll benefit him in both of those ways. So we're going to do that now. All right, so we're going to make a spacer change on Bobby's fork and shock. We're going to start with the fork. The number one most important thing to remember when doing this is please, please, please check it 3 or 4 times and make sure all the air is out. Because if you do not do that and you remove the air cap, it is going to send a high-speed projectile across the room and into your face and various other faces around. So be sure of that. So that is what we're going to start with. We're going to start right here. And you can use a small Allen wrench or whatever, but you just want to let the air out of the fork. And the reason you see it compressing like that is because the negative chamber still has air in it, and so it's pulling the fork down as you do that. So these the RockShox guys utilize a cassette tool to remove the cap. Yep, that guy's just going to drop in there, and then we're going to remove that. And you probably want to press down on this while you're doing this so that it doesn't slip off and you gouge the crap out of your brand new beautiful carbon frame. There we go. So you're seeing one spacer in there like we knew there would be. And this is actually the seal of the air chamber, and that air chamber is your air spring. Quite simple. And then while we're doing by adding spacers is reducing that volume. That's all we're doing. So we're making that air chamber smaller, which means as you compress it, it ramps up and gets firmer much quicker. And so all you got to do with these guys is just thread them together, which I'm having quite a hard time with. Motor skills are hard. There we go. Just thread these guys together. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then all you got to do is thread that guy back in. It's that simple. I typically like to cycle it every 50 psi or so. We're only going to 85, so when we reach the 50 psi mark, we're going to give this thing a good cycle, make sure the chambers are equalized, and then we're going to head on to our final number of 85. We'll cycle it again, and then we should be there. And then we're going to recheck our sag after doing the same with the shock. Oftentimes you have to pull up because you're already stuck below the dimple. So sometimes you have to actually grab the bottom of the crown steer and the top of the brace on the lower legs and actually pull up. And that will get you your equalization. So I stopped at 50, like 51, and now we're at 49.5. That's because that negative and positive chamber equalized. So we're gonna go right on to our target number of 85. And then we're gonna do the exact same thing again, check the number again. All right, now we've reached our target number of 85 PSI. And we're gonna go ahead and cycle this fork again and make sure our chambers are equalized. And we're just gonna pull up just for good measure. I think we're there now, but. And then I always check the shock pump again. So we lost a half PSI by doing that. So there, we're gonna correct it to 85 and we'll move on to the shock. So to get to the spacers in the X2, you basically have to just pull this snap ring here. This guy right here on top, you're gonna rotate him and get him to a spot where you can pull him out. And then the whole can is gonna pop this way. And you're gonna add spacers, pop it back on, good to go. All right, so we've removed the lovely snap ring from the X2. We're now gonna just push the air can straight up and we're gonna expose the spacers. So in this case, Bobby has 1. And we're gonna add another one. So we're gonna go up to 2. And what's really cool is that you can do this on the bike without removing the shock, which is really helpful. We're just gonna install this guy. We don't have a ton of room because the shock is completely deflated here, but we've got enough room to get one in there. There it is. So now we've got 2 spacers thrown in the can. We're just gonna pull the air sleeve back down and re-inflate it to the previous number that we recorded for his sag setting. And then we're gonna send him off the jump again. All right, so we've just added a spacer to the rear and a spacer to the front. And although this seems unnecessary, this is all an important part of the process. We've added a spacer, now we wanna reset sag again. Because if we can achieve the same sag number with lower air pressure, he's gonna get a softer off the top feel. The spacer is actually gonna help his bottom out resistance, and a less known advantage to adding a spacer is you get a little more mid-stroke support. So, which is really great. So softer off the top, more mid-stroke support, and more bottom out resistance. Kind of can't go wrong. So we've done that. We're gonna reset sag and see where we end up. Same process as before. 13 millimeters.
We started with 22.
13.5 millimeters.
Okay.
And we had 15.
We had 15.
Mm-hmm. So that inherently means we can reduce the shock pressure.
Sweet.
Which is what we're after.
Yeah.
Maybe not by much, but every little bit helps. So now we're seeing 17 millimeters. So we're gonna add a little bit back. 16 mil. I'm good with that. Let's go with that.
Okay. I'm good with that.
Let's go with that. Okay, let's do the front.
30 mil.
That's right on it. It's 30 mil.
Sweet.
So we're not going to touch that one.
Nice.
All right, so now we had re-zeroed all the settings in terms of rebound.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put those back to where they were. And if we had to make a large change in air pressure, then we would need to make, or even a decently sized change in air pressure, we would need to make a change in rebound to match that. Because again, the air spring rate, or in this case pressure, is, you know, going to determine what your rebound setting needs to be.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do that now.
Okay. And just a reminder, what were they? It was 4
So you're
clicks.
4 out on that.
Okay. 4 clicks.
And then we are 2 to 4 on low speed rebound and 1 to 2 on high speed. But since we took out air, we are gonna move toward the higher number of clicks. So we're gonna go 4 low speed rebound and 2 high speed rebound.
Okay. Okay, so we just got back in. We did lots of adjustments. We did lots of, you know, trial and error and, you know, doing this changes that. I mean, like, what do you think?
Well, let's boil down what we did here.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. So really this whole time we've still been working on the foundation of this suspension house that we're building here.
Right.
And what we've really gotten to where we are now is a great sag setting, which I feel like works really well. Bobby's went outside and we've done some like test hits off this little kicker into a big kind of step downy type situation where we can kind of get a G out kind of feel and see what our bottom out resistance looks like. And we've come back, we've added spacers, all that. We actually were able to adjust a little bit of air pressure and lower the rear a little bit. So have a little better a small bump compliance, a little better mid-stroke support, and thus we've got a little lower pressure, which is great.
Yeah.
So after doing a couple test hits and feeling of the suspension, it felt like the rear end was a little slow coming back, returning to that 0 position. It felt a little slow. So in this case, actually, we took a couple clicks out of low speed rebound, and that didn't help a whole lot. Did so with a high speed rebound circuit, also a couple clicks there, and we've kind of strayed away from the manufacturer's suggested settings on that shock. But those 2 changes brought the rear end up to the speed of the front end in terms of returning to its, you know, static position, and so it made the whole bike feel more balanced. The rear end was real slow, the front end was real fast. So the front end felt really good. We brought the rear end to match the front end. So now we have what I call our like base setting. We've got air pressure, we have spacers, and we have the rebound setting dialed in for that air pressure. And it took a long time to get here, but again, the foundation is the most important part of this setup, and that's sag, and that's where we're finally have reached that point. So.
Yeah.
What I want to talk about is compression, because we haven't really touched on compression at all today. It's an important one. I also think it's a bit subjective. Some people may disagree with me. There are manufacturer recommended settings for compression, both in the fork and the shock. But what I like to do is start from a full open position on both high speed compression, low speed compression, on both the shock and the fork. And as you need support, I add clicks of compression control, which we talked about earlier. We're just controlling how easily and how rapidly that suspension can compress. So as we add more compression damping, we're making it harder to compress and slowing down the shaft speed, basically. And so an example that I told Bobby that, you know, might apply, say you're pedaling along and you're like, man, this thing has quite a bit of bob and the bike's moving a lot under pedal. That is a slow speed movement or a low speed movement. So if you wanted more pedaling support, we add a couple clicks of low speed compression. And I would probably start in the rear and add a couple clicks. Be like, cool, did that resolve the problem? We want to add support until the point we start losing sensitivity to bumps. Once we start losing sensitivity and the bike starts kind of popping up, we're resisting that compression, thus you're kind of starting to feel all those little bumps. So you can add low speed compression until you get a little bit of pedal bob control. Once you've done that in the rear, the problem is probably going to shift toward the front, because now we've added the support in the rear. Now the front has less support, so we might need to add a couple clicks of low speed compression in the front, in the fork. The beauty of having a separate low speed and high speed circuit is the high speed is going to control those really fast movements. Like anytime we're getting a fast shaft speed where the suspension is compressing rapidly, like at the bottom of a drop. So you go off a drop and you just get that big smack, and that's a really fast movement. Those settings, high speed compression on both the fork and the shock, control the resistance of compression in those situations only. So you're like, hey, this all feels great. I got my pedal bob dialed. That feels great. But I'm going off big hits, and I feel like I'm not getting this support. I'm blowing through the travel. Obviously you have the bottom out resistance, but it doesn't give you the mid-stroke support necessarily in those high-speed situations. So if you feel like you're losing all that support and, you know, pushback when you're going through those big hits, then you start adding clicks of high-speed compression control. So, and then it's really important as you go through that process is you're constantly updating your settings. And I always recommend build an Apple Note, have a notebook, whatever you like, and we would record all of these settings, which we've done, and you save those as your base settings. Yeah. And then once you get to a spot where you're comfortable with low speed compression, you update that note and add low speed compression. And then once you feel like you have your base set up, and then you're really ready to dive in deep and, you know, start adjusting one setting at a time and really feeling it out on a trail that you know well, then you've got your base settings and you know, wrap parentheses around all those settings in your note. And then as you change, you have like, here's where I am, here's where I came from. Right. And then if you ever get into a spot where you're like, oh my God, this feels crazy, like I've done something wacky, you can always go back to those settings that are in the parentheses and just move everything back there, come back to a comfortable place, and again, start working one setting at a time, and eventually, you know, because what we're trying to do here is get you like 85% of the way there, and then you really can only get that last 15% on the trail. I don't think there's any other way to do it. And like until somebody invents like some sort of bicycle dyno that you can put them on, you know, there's a suspension dyno, but that's not like real world, you know, trail conditions. So really the idea is to run that same, you know, 1 mile loop or something that has diversity, chunk, high speed chatter, drop, berms, hits. Run it, only tweak one setting. Does that feel better or worse? And then just concentrate on the feel that you're getting in the bike and then try to correlate, hey, this is a feeling I'm getting. Let's talk about it and correlate that to a setting change. And be very methodical. And I know this seems like homework and it seems like math and it seems like school. But if you want to get the most out of your suspension, and God knows we spend a lot of money on suspension products for mountain bikes, it really makes sense to take the time to get them to where they could be and where they're best benefiting you as a rider.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you know, I know this is a lot of information to take in.
It's a lot.
But, you know, as Gene said, like taking the time now means you're going to have more fun on the trail, you know, and you're going to enjoy these bikes. I'm going to enjoy this bike, and I'm sure you're enjoying your bike for hopefully, you know, years. And so taking, you know, couple hours, you know, on the onset, and then probably you know, a couple rides to dial it in. I mean, just means that you're going to enjoy it even more.
And it might take the better part of a month for you to go from 85% to like 95 or 100.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. It's okay. It's always a work in progress to a point. But just know that, you know, we've built the foundation. That's the place we start from. That doesn't have to happen again, and that is easily the most time-consuming part about this. The rest of this is just ride your bike. Get out there. And we all love doing that. So like, got a great excuse to ride your bike. If you didn't already. Yeah. And then the rest of it is just dialing it. And I think it'd be great to do a follow-up and see after you've ridden this for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, and we talk about the feelings that you felt on the bike and what felt great and maybe what didn't. And then we can talk about how to correlate that feel to a setting change. And I think that's the next step in this process. Well, Gene, thanks a lot, as always. Absolutely. Wealth of information. All right, guys, there you have it. That is a wrap on this two-part series, in-depth, full suspension setup. I hope you got a lot out of it because we gave you a lot of information. Thanks to Gene at eCycle Works. He's been a huge help. He's been fixing my bikes, giving me advice, doing some builds for me for almost a year now. Go check him out at eCycleWorks.com. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, stay safe and keep on riding.
I didn't really pop anything. I was just letting it go.
Yeah.
And it felt all right.
Yeah.
See, if anything, I probably need to slow the rebound in the rear a little bit.
Slow the rebound shock 2 clicks. Let's see how that works.
A little bit better. Sailed that. Couple pedals in. Step up. Do that. Get rid of that. That time I popped the last table. Whew. I was sailing.